let's go over to talk about presenter today. I really wanted to introduce Mr. Paul Cobian. So Paul and I have known each other pretty much throughout my whole career, 15 years. And Paul is a pretty interesting individual. He's an engineer. He's also an environmental affairs officer. So he at times wear two different hats, and he's been around Asst pretty much involved in a lot of major projects. So currently he is working as assistant division manager at the Solid Resources Citywide Recycling Division. Paul, like myself, is a Cal Poly Pomona graduate. Yeah, right. So he has a chemical engineering degree as well as an engineering management from Cal Poly Pomona. So Paul kind of, throughout his career, he kind of branched off from engineering series and became an environmental supervisor, which deals with a lot of challenging issues that not a typical engineer will deal with, program management, contract management. And I would really like to hear from you how you develop those soft skills, because it's all about that, man. You have solid technical background and you kind of hone in on your soft skills. And so this is Paul. So he's worked as I've, since he graduated in 2008 from Cal Poly Pomona, and he's worked in regulatory, legislative, technical, environmental analysis, and policy support on program level. So we have wastewater program, solid resources, clean water. So Paul has been a part of pretty much all the programs that Sanitation is taking the lead on. So with that, Paul, I'll hand it over to you for the presentation. So typically, I will switch hands, but since I'm going to be presenting, so I'm going to switch gear a little bit and go to a different presentation. So starting off here and changing my view to full screen. Let me know if it's popping up.
There it is.
All right.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that wonderful introduction. Yes. So Ryan and I actually, so Ryan, you started in what, 2007? Is that right?
Like a few months before, I think 2007 October.
Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting because Ryan and I, while we were in undergrad, we had a few mutual friends. So I didn't know Ryan while we were at Cal Poly, but I would always see Ryan around campus because Ryan was always on his bike, just kind of whizzing through hallways, and he would never run anybody over, but he was always on his bike. And Ryan was real cool because Ryan's still the same person that he was 15 years ago as he is today. Just always smiling and just great attitude. So he had a lot of friends on campus. So it was always interesting when I started working for the city. It just so happened that Ryan and I were actually on the same floor, different divisions, but and so when I saw him, I was like, hey, you're from Cal Poly? He's like, yeah. And so we just started talking since then. And he's been a great colleague and somebody that I can also rely upon. So Ryan's got a wonderful background also. You did watershed protection for several years, right, Ryan? And then he too recently had the opportunity to promote over to the engineering group within sanitation. So it's been a pleasure, Ryan, I think, working with you. But yeah, we've done a lot, I guess, these past 14, 15 years. So I'm excited. Once again, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess kind of just jumping in to really the presentation. We go to the next slide. So wanted to share a little bit with you, a little bit on the solid resources side of what we do here within sanitation. At Sanitation, we provide solid resources collection services to the entire city of Los Angeles. So that's 4 million residents. To put that kind of in perspective, 4 million, that's larger than, I believe, 23 states in the United States. So we've got a really big task when we're talking about wastewater management, when we're talking about solid resources management, clean water. It's really, really big. We service 750,000 households comprised of 530,000 single family and 220,000 multifamily units. So that's duplex to 4-unit buildings. The 6 Recycla service providers, which are franchised by the city, handles about 65,000 accounts for medium and large multifamily complexes, condo buildings, and commercial industrial businesses. And so just to kind of put all of this kind of stats into perspective, we collect about 1.7 million tons per year of refuse, recyclables, yard trimmings, and bulky items on the residential side, and about 1.6 million tons per year on its commercial side. And I want to do a quick pause right there with just that information. I have 2 small children, and when they started getting to the age of, they start asking their parents, well, what do you do, right? Like, what do you do for a living? And so originally, when I started my career, we were supporting the wastewater treatment facilities. And so, I would pose the question to them of like, well, what happens when we flush the toilet? And they're like, I don't know, it just goes somewhere. And so now being on the solid resources side, it's like, well, what happens to the trash? And they're like, I don't know. We put it in a trash can and it just goes somewhere, right? And so the really interesting thing about LA Sanitation is that the buck stops with us. We have to figure it out. We have to figure out what we're going to do with that wastewater. We have to figure out what we're going to do with all of the solids that we collect on an annual basis. And that's where really it comes in, that we really need some incredible engineers. We need some incredible scientists to really figure out, to plan, I think just kind of forecast really, what it is that we're going to do to achieve sustainable practices of dealing, in this case, with solid waste. We collect over 220,000 tons per year of recyclable material from our curbside blue bin program. And the recycler program collects an additional about 180,000, 200,000 tons per year of recyclable material. These recyclable materials are sorted at material recovery facilities, MRFs, and the marketable products are sold to be reused as feedstock, and residual materials are then sent to landfills. And what I wanted to just kind of point out is that, the city at large has been a leader in protecting its natural environment and the health and safety of its residents. And really, LA San has been an environmental steward responsible for the safe and efficient management of solid waste generated within the city for more than 130 years. If we go to the next slide, what you're going to see is that we have a long history of implementing new strategies and programs for managing solid waste systems to meet these new challenges. The shift of emphasis from waste disposal to waste prevention and source reduction really has been influenced by growing public concern for the environment. If you guys were to visit our LA Sanitation website, we have a link in there that takes you to this wonderful history it's this interactive link that kind of allows you to kind of go through really our history with your sanitation. Definitely encourage everybody to go look for that. Pam, who's on this call, she was kind of one of the key leads in really developing that just a couple years ago, and it's a wonderful thing. But I pulled some information from our history just to share today to kind of put things in perspective. So in 1874, the first city dump was established, is actually located on First Street in Alameda. And then in 1925, the Los Angeles Byproducts Company begins to accept recyclable scraps and tin metals from the city. Maybe about 2 decades later, the Bureau of Maintenance and Sanitation is created. So that's when our agency's existence came into being. And then what's interesting is that in 1957, backyard incineration was discontinued due to air quality concerns. So it highlights that there was acceptable practices here in the city of Los Angeles of disposing of waste using incineration. And then what we find is that during the 1960s, we closed 3 landfills, 2 of which had just opened in the mid to late 1950s. And then Bishop Canyon landfill that had opened in 1966 closes in 1969. And then over the next 3 decades, we closed 3 more landfills. In 1987, the pilot recycling program brought curbside recycling to about 15,000 residents. So, we're a couple of decades out from really developing this full-fledged curbside recycling program. And then just 2 years later, California enacts the California Integrated Waste Management Act of 1989, which it basically called for all jurisdictions within California to divert at least about 50% of its waste from landfills. And then 1996, we moved away from a pilot and we went to this full-fledged kind of blue bin recycling program. And a lot of great things continue to happen. In 2013, this was kind of a watershed moment for the city. We passed, our city council passed the single-use carry-out plastic bag ban ordinance. And this was actually before the state had also moved forward with this ordinance. And this was groundbreaking in that, like, as I said, it really set the train in motion for the state to follow suit soon thereafter. But what I think what's really interesting when we're talking about solid waste management, it provided a new solid resources management tool. And what I'm going to refer to this tool today is that it's a source reduction ordinance. Soon after, a couple years later in 2019, we had our straws on request ordinance. This too was before the state had passed its own ordinance. And so this ordinance is still in its full effect. So if you are to visit a restaurant, you have to ask for a straw. It's statewide now, but we were one of the first ones to pass it. And then in 2021, we passed the foodware accessories on request ordinance. And so that's, napkins, condiments, things of that nature. The state just implemented theirs. I believe it was, I think it was July of this year. And so really, what do we take from this timeline? Well, if there's one thing that we can take away from this slide, it's that solid resources management is about continuous change and our ability to evolve. We've made a lot of progress, but our history tells us that much more is to be done, especially when it comes to single-use plastics. On the next slide, what I wanted to share was that in 2020, UCLA had released a study on plastic waste in LA County. And what they presented in that study is that plastics are the primary source of land litter in California. Plastics are infiltrating our city drainages and it accrues in our landfills. Urban runoff channels plastics to the Pacific Ocean. And, it doesn't take much, unfortunately, that there is a loss of tourism and recreational and aesthetic values because of this pollution and litter that we see in the streets and in our communities. It's a threat to human health. And although plastics are technically recyclable, a majority are not recycled. Sometimes food residue minimizes the recyclability of single-use plastic foodware. Replacements with like compostable foodware implies expanding composting infrastructure. We need to ensure that there's replacement materials have a lower environmental impact than plastics. And so really, plastic goods, they're ubiquitous in our everyday lives as the material is used in many products that consumers purchase and use every day. However, what we find is that many plastic products that are considered single-use, they're not refillable and are used as, for instance, like coverings and packaging. And most consumers, they do not reuse these materials. And so what happens is they eventually find their way to the landfills, or if they don't make it to the landfills, they're polluting, just the areas around us. Additionally, what I wanted to share was that the successful resale of recyclable material is heavily dependent on market demand. And currently, certain plastics do not have markets to incentivize the collection and recovery of these materials. As a consequence of these factors, an abundance of plastic waste ends up in our landfills and or pollutes our environment, affecting our environment and public health. There on the slide, you'll see a quick stat based upon the 2020 International Coastal Cleanup. Single-use plastic items contribute to over 8 million pounds of waste that ends up in the ocean every year. Based upon a recent waste characterization study that was done, we estimate that somewhere around 16% of the total waste that we dispose of is plastic. And so what we see there on the slide is a linear economy traditionally follows a produce, a sell, a use, and dispose kind of system, where products are created and used once and then disposed of as waste. With this comes a decrease in the value of materials and products. There's volatile prices due to resource scarcity and an unstable supply of raw materials due to overconsumption. This also generates huge levels of waste and greenhouse gas emissions from consistent resource pooling and production. And this ultimately contributes to environmental degradation and climate change. I think what's interesting is that the United Nations International Resource Panel concluded that natural resource extraction and processing contribute to about half of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what we've been talking about here within sanitation as well as within the city is really the circular economy works quite differently. It really, the goal is to close the loop on the linear produce, sell, use, dispose pattern by really retaining the highest utility and value of products, components, and materials for as long as possible. With circular economic activity, waste is reduced to a minimum because everything produced is transferred and used for somewhere else continuously. Currently, certain plastics with low utility and value, such as film plastics and foam plastics, do not have markets to incentivize the collection and recovery of these materials. And so really, just because you may put something in the blue bin for recycling does not necessarily mean that there is a market for it to be reprocessed and reused. And so as a result, the material is sent to a landfill as waste. Next slide. So look, single-use plastics, they are a real problem here in the city, and our LA City Council has instructed our department to address those problems head on. As a major coastal megacity, there is a greater urgency to reduce the loading to the coastal environment. And so with the successful passage of recent ordinances, the city has set its sights on source reduction of plastic waste. The goals of these proposed ordinances are kind of fourfold. We want to reduce the amount of single-use plastic waste, which cannot be composted or recycled. We want to reduce the amount of plastic waste that pollutes our waterways, groundwater, and even finding its way back into our bodies because of microplastics. We want to encourage the use of reusable packaging, containers, and reusable bags. And we want to improve the aesthetics of our community and eliminate the risk to wildlife. So how do we solve this issue? Next slide, Ryan. The city wants to lead by example. We want to walk the walk. And this may sound easy, but the city has many unique departments and challenging facilities such as the zoo, airport, libraries. Just to put this in context, the city of Los Angeles employs a diverse workforce of more than 50,000 people across 44 unique departments. I'm going to repeat that again. We have over 50,000 employees in the city of LA across 44 unique departments. And it's a huge lift. But we do believe it should help if we were to lead by example. We do believe it should help in piloting new techniques and materials that can then assist our businesses and communities to make the transition. And so the first ordinance that I wanted to share with everybody that we're working on, it really is, it's the Zero Waste Facilities and Events Ordinance. And really the goal here is to curtail the production of solid waste during city-sponsored events and at city-owned facilities by reducing food waste, preventing the usage of non-recyclable foodware and other non-recyclable materials. And we want to promote the use of reusable and or recyclable compostable materials. The ordinance would apply to all city departments as well as contractors that operate at city facilities and events on city property. On the next slide, we'll see that there's a few highlights from the proposed ordinance. We want to prohibit from disposing of foodware, of disposable foodware for dine-in meal services or catered services. Water will no longer be provided in plastic bottles or in disposable cups. We want to provide hydration or bottle refill stations. There will be no longer single-use disposable beverage cups would be allowed at city facilities and events. On the food waste reduction side, we want to donate all eligible surplus edible food to food rescue organizations. I think a couple of weeks ago we had James Rosca, I believe, on SB 1383 and organics, and we want to minimize really that organic waste that's going to landfills, because that is really contributing a significant amount of the GHG emissions that are coming from the landfills. And so, we want to minimize really the surplus edible food that is going into our waste stream. We want to prohibit disposal of any surplus edible food. We want to also make sure that organic waste collection is made available at all city-sponsored events. And lastly, and these are just, some kind of housekeeping things, we want to make sure that all promotional items that we're giving away at community events or catered events, that it's functional and that it's not made of plastic or some type of synthetic fiber. So we're being really thoughtful with kind of what are the parameters of this ordinance and how we want to lead by example. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the second proposed ordinance that we're considering right now. And it's actually, we went before council committee not too long ago. So we're hoping to see this one go before city council for their full consideration, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. LA County just passed their EPS, their expanded polystyrene ban this past April. And so the city is also seeking to propose a similar ordinance citywide. And so really our objective with this ordinance is to reduce and eliminate the amount of EPS in the city's solid waste stream, and also to reduce the amount of EPS material that reaches local waterways and the Pacific Ocean. The proposed ordinance, we're looking at really prohibiting the sale or distribution of EPS products, such as those things that are like as you can see there in the on the slide, foodware products, egg cartons and food trays, EPS coolers, and ice chests that are not encased in a more durable material, as well as EPS shipping materials. So you'll see there kind of the packing peanuts. On the next slide, we do recognize that there is utility to EPS. So we have included a few exemptions. They include products such as surfboards or coolers that are fully encapsulated or encased in a more durable material. And the reason is, these are not single-use items. These things, when they are disposed of, they are finding their way back into trash cans, and so they're not being blown away. So that's why for, some of these were included as exemptions and other ones are not. Products that are prepackaged outside of the city using expanded polystyrene as part of the packaging material would also be exempt. And then we also recognize EPS is used for the manufacture of like safety devices, appliances, and equipment. So things like bike helmets, car seats, things like that, those would be exempt. And then there is some utility. We are aware that the construction industry does use sometimes EPS products. And so we would exempt that as well. So we do anticipate this proposed ordinance impacting many parties across the city. So that includes restaurants, delivery companies, consumers, food trucks, recycling facilities. We do anticipate it having an impact. But ultimately, the goal here is we want to have a positive environmental benefit on the environment. So next ordinance. So we've talked about zero waste facilities and events. We've talked about expanded polystyrene. Now I wanted to just share with you the last one really is about plastic bags. We really had to kind of thread the needle here. As I mentioned to you guys earlier, the city was one of the first to ban single-use plastic bags from groceries and supermarkets. And the state followed later with the specific definition of stores. And so in our effort to remove the exemptions from our 2013 ban, we had to honor the ground that the state had established. As a result, we had to really kind of carve out those businesses and bag types that are still available for regulation by local municipalities. And so we're looking at all of the legal kind of considerations when we're trying to identify, well, what else can we do in this plastic bag arena? What we did is, what we're proposing is that it would also expand the type of establishments that are prohibited from distributing plastic single-use carryout bags to include retail stores, such as hardware stores, clothing stores, and then as well as restaurants and food service providers, farmer markets, and open air markets. Right now, for instance, all of us purchase things, and so we notice that when we go to the grocery store, it's probably the only place that we're being charged, a plastic bag fee. What we're proposing here within the city is we want to apply it to really all retail establishments, with the goal of we want to encourage for people to start using reusable bags in their purchasing of items. The other element on this one, it's still on this slide. We want to prohibit the following types of single-use plastic bags from being used or distributed at the point of sale. So the top area was retail stores. So we're looking at specifically groups of stores. The second area of the ordinance that we're proposing is specific types of bags. So plastic produce bags used by customers and stores for fruits and vegetables. We are proposing for those to be also part of this ban. Pharmacy plastic bags used to carry out prescription drugs. And the last one, which may be interesting to a few. We also want to we want to eliminate dry cleaning plastic bags and films provided by dry cleaners. If our city council were to approve and adopt this proposal, we would be, from our understanding, the first in the state. And so we once again, the goal here is to eliminate these types of plastics from our waste stream. Next slide, Ryan. So similar to EPS, we anticipate this proposed ordinance impacting many parties across the city. And so those include food trucks, consumers, restaurants, dry cleaners. But the city's objective for this proposed ordinances are really, one, we want to reduce the number of single-use plastic bags currently consumed in the city of Los Angeles each year. We want to reduce the adverse environmental impacts associated with single-use plastic bags. And we also want to promote a shift toward opting out of bag use when not necessary and promoting the use of reusable bags. We think that that's important. We know that it'll have a positive impact, and that's what we're really trying to focus on here with a lot of these ordinances, is that it is about behavioral changes. And so it is going to take some time. Next slide up, Ryan. So where do we go from here, right? What is LA's single-use plastic future? Well, this past April, our city council approved for our department to continue to identify strategies to reduce plastic waste in our city. The three proposed ordinances that I shared with you today, which is zero waste facilities and events, the EPS ban, and then the single-use plastic bag expansion. We've had one of them already go before council committee, working on a few amendments, and then the other two are also expected to go hopefully before the end of this year. But soon afterward, it is our hope to continue this journey as we explore other opportunities to reduce single-use plastics. Those include bottled beverage ordinances. The idea here is to ban non-refillable plastic water bottles and require that refillable bottles have post-consumer recycled content as well as leashed lids. Reducing the number of plastic water bottles produced will in turn decrease the number of bottles to be recycled. In addition, requiring minimum post-consumer content in plastic bottles creates demand for manufacturers to purchase recycled plastics, thus creating a market for the material that will keep such plastics out of landfills or from being littered. We also want to look at reusable foodware for dine-in services. This is another one that is important. Some cities and counties across the state are beginning to pick up this one up in some form or fashion. Ryan, it's interesting. I just remembered a memory came to my mind. There was that restaurant down the street from Public Works building. I think it was like a watermelon. And I remember going there, and you showed up with your to-go container. You gave it to them, and they basically they gave you your lunch, and you went back to the office, I think. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's one of the things that you started developing a relationship with the vendors, or in this case, restaurant. And I was like, I go there 3 days a week, so I really hate using polystyrene container and throw it away. So I asked them, like, can I bring my own container? It will be money saving for you too, because you don't have to spend the money. So they're like, we love it. And yeah, you can pack as much as you want, in your containers. I brought a giant container.
You did. I remember Ryan walking away with like twice the amount of food. And then I got my plate. I ended up eating there with the group of people, and I was like, Ryan got like twice as much food as I did. And so we joked around about that. But really what we're proposing here is really for that to be a practice citywide, right? And it does, and it sounds a little extreme, but we have to look at it from as we said, a resource management perspective of, does it make sense for us to continue to use these single-use items? How is that benefiting the environment? The amount of time and effort and energy and resources just to create the single-use item for it to be disposed within, if it's a plate, it's going to be disposed of within maybe 10 minutes after, you consume it. And so, but this is something that we are exploring. And as I mentioned, there's other cities and counties across the state that have already moved in this direction. We think that this is something that we can do also within the city. The last one, we want to ban the disposal of textiles. While a significant portion of textiles are reused locally or overseas, waste characterization studies by CalRecycle revealed that textiles represent the 6th most prevalent material disposed of in California landfills, with 95% of this material either reusable or recyclable. So we want to eventually consider an ordinance to ban manufacturers and retailers, both online and brick and mortar stores, from disposing apparel and textiles. including those items that are unsold, return, scraps, and remnants. I think for these bottom two, I think it's important to know Asst Sanitation, the Industrial Waste Management Division, they have already begun some pilots in both of these areas. And so, you know, this isn't just about talk. We're trying to identify pilots of how we can assist businesses and the industry to move forward in this direction. That's one approach, but we also recognize the value in developing these ordinances to say this is going to be a requirement going forward. So we are taking this really kind of seriously. So in closing, I do want to quickly recap. One, that the City of Los Angeles and LA Sanitation and Environment, we are committed to protecting public health and the environment. You know, today we had an opportunity to talk about solid resources, but we take the same approach to really all of those areas that we're responsible. So our wastewater, our clean water, watershed protection, our solid resources management. This is what we do day in, day out. We're being thoughtful. We're using the best available technology that we have so that we can continue to protect the public health and the environment. Number two, single-use plastics and plastic waste. They are polluting our waterways, our beaches, and our parks, and they are endangering wildlife. We need to find a solution to this, right? Number three, a linear economy is not sustainable. And that's where we come in as consumers, right? We too need to make a decision. And I'm so happy that Ryan's here. You know, Ryan, without even having this presentation, he made this decision years ago of there's a better way, you know, of what Ryan can do in his life on a daily basis with regards to how he's going to interact with restaurants and things like that. And then lastly, the city is developing strategies to combat plastic pollution, including developing ordinances that focus on source reduction of plastic waste. And we are moving towards, we want to move towards a circular economy. So with that, I want to thank each of you for your time and attention. But I encourage each of the individuals that are here today, for each of us to take inventory, right, of the items that we are purchasing and that we're using on a daily basis. I think when we make a purchase, ask ourselves, is this a product that I actually need, right? And if not, maybe we just stop purchasing it. There are some things that we do purchase purely out of habit and we don't necessarily need them. Another question, can this product ever be used again? If not, then consider something else, right? Single-use products are being scrutinized for a reason. They're used briefly, then live the rest of their life in either the dump, the environment, animals' intestines, or are finding their way back into our bodies via microplastics. So if there's more, if you guys are interested, we have our web link down there below. We've got a lot of great information about all of our programs here on the solid resources side and all of the great work that we're doing. I encourage each of you to visit it. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ryan. Thank you, Ryan.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I have tons of questions. I'm going to wait for attendees to ask their question as well. I've always been in the water side. You know, I work in the at the landfill for about 1.5 years before it closed down with Punta Hills landfill. So I've seen tons and tons of garbage. What I call, you know, typical street name is garbage trucks going up there. Never ending filling the space that we have. So great initiatives. I'm going to stop the share and let the questions come in. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, technically, or I'm going to go into the a couple of slides regarding the recruitment and upcoming activities. So maybe let the questions come in. I'm going to go ahead and share my remaining slides regarding the LA San's efforts to recruit great minds. So with that, bear with me a little bit. So I switch the screens. So with that in mind, you know, we have a lot of challenges that we have to face. It's not black and white. It's not simple. You know, it's very complicated. It requires different angles of solutions. You know, politically, scientifically, behavioral changes, social science, innovation out of the box. So with that, you know, serving close to 4 million people in the city of LA is a challenge. And LA Sanitation, we take care of pretty much everything, you know, food waste, solid waste, wastewater. So, you know, every time you go into the grocery store, you go out, you bring something in your house. There are two ways, you know, that will end up either in the landfill all at the wastewater treatment plant. So that's something that I learned from school. So, you know, we're there with you. By the time you make the decision, we have to start planning for it. You know, you go out to the store, you buy a plastic bag of fruits. Some of that will be broken down, you know, through the toilet system and get to our wastewater treatment plant. The container will go to the landfill or recycling facility. So, keep us in mind whenever you make those decisions, because it will impact pretty much as a society as a whole. With that, I want to kind of start talking about the exciting opportunities that we have. We have environmental engineering associate in the areas that Paul mentioned: wastewater, water recycling, water resources, solid resources. Industrial waste is one of the areas that we're heavily focused in. We're hiring environmental engineering associates with the annual starting salary, as you see here, with the different levels. So you come in at associate 1, you go up all the way to associate 2 and 3 based on your qualifications. When you have the PE's professional engineering license, you get a bonus as associate 2. The requirements are you have to have a bachelor's or master's degree is preferable. If you have an EIT, it's strongly recommended. If you already have a professional engineering license, that's great. So in minimum, you must be 18 years old, have a proof of identity and legal right to work in the US. EIT is required within the 3 years of being hired. So once you get on board, you have about 2.5 to 3 years to finish your EIT. That's a condition of your requirement. It is a hybrid position, so you must be located within commutable distance from your field work. City of LA is really big. We have a lot of different offices, so keep in mind that when you apply for it, it is a hybrid position. We're going in 2 to 3 days a week to our offices, and you do need to provide proof of vaccination for COVID. Another classification is for those who are still in school. We're hiring student engineers. You must be a full-time student. It is not an internship. It is a work environment. Requirements are pretty much the same as general requirements in this sense. As for all the other city employments, COVID vaccination require. It is an exempt position where you will be allowed to work up to 950 hours a year, which equates to 20 hours a week half time. So if you work 3 days a week, you'll be able to work throughout the year. We have really flexible schedule. We work with your school schedule, and you can catch up with work during your downtime from school, during the break time, when you need to focus, when you need to study, you have final and midterm. We're flexible. You can take time off. The starting salary or hourly rate is around $20.77 all the way to $32.25, depending on your standing. So if you're a senior, you will be starting at a higher salary rate or pay rate. It is again a hybrid position, and you must be located within commutable distance from Los Angeles. And how do you apply for those jobs? Here are the upcoming events that sanitation is going to be participating in. So we are going to be a Society of Women Engineer regional event in Seattle in March, an SBE regional coming up this weekend, November 17th to 20th in Los Angeles. The other on-campus interviews, the one coming up on December 1st is going to be at LA Trade Tech. We are accepting your resumes. We're doing the same day interviews and same day job offers on site. So I recommend you show up early. Don't wait until the last minute. Don't wait until 4 o'clock. We'll be interviewing as much as time allows. If you don't have a chance to interview, please ask one of us to put your resume in the overflow pile. So we'll call you for the interview at the following days. So that is one big event at LA Trade Tech on December 1st. We are going to Cal State LA on November 30th. NSBE interviews are happening on 11/30th, November 30th, the same day. We'll be at UCLA Friday, December 2nd. And lastly, we're going to Cal Poly Pomona on December 7th. So those are upcoming events where LSN is actively recruiting the student engineer and environmental engineering position. So how do you get your application? How do you get a hand of get more information? You can go to your campus career center, use your school's handshake system, and bring your resume to our booth at the events that I just mentioned. And I also wanted to highlight that LA Trade Tech is an open event. If you meet all the minimum qualifications, please show up and bring your resume, and you will get an interview in the same day or the following days, depending on the time that you submit your resume. With that, you will be placed in one of the 4 core programs that LA Sanitation has: clean water, solid resources, where Paul is currently at, stormwater, and other supporting divisions such as executive customer care. Believe it or not, we have a big financial division that manages $750 million of operating budget for LA Sanitation, and regulatory affairs division, where Paul used to be at. They handle all the regulations at the city, regional level, state level, and national level. These are the 2 names and faces that you will most likely be interacting. Miss Deandra and Miss Ani, very approachable, and these are their email addresses. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. Again, just kind of summarizing where we're at today with the Tech Talks. Today is the last of the series, and we talk about exciting topic, plastics. With that, I'm going to go into the Q&As, and we do have 15 minutes, so we have plenty of time.